Well, it is 2 after. Kevin, you ready to get started?
Well, let's get going. We've got a really exciting and topic that I'm very passionate about as well. We had
Yeah.
Copilot last time, which was great. Fantastic conversation there, and looking forward to a different conversation here.
Yeah, so thanks everybody for joining. I appreciate it. So today you got myself, Chris Hinch, the Microsoft Practice Director here at A&M, as well as my partner in crime on these webinars, Kevin Martins, Director of Partner Technology Architects from Microsoft. Kevin and I have been working together, I don't know, going on almost 3.5, 4 years now. And this is just something we like to do, is to put the information out there to people. And today we're going to be talking about Microsoft Purview, which is what you wanted to hear about based on the last webinar that Kevin just mentioned, the Copilot one. This was the highest rated poll that came out of that one, as you guys wanted to know more about data security. And with Microsoft, that is Microsoft Purview. So during this webinar, we do have the chat feature and the Q&A turned on. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in there. And if we can work it in, or if we can answer them, we will. Kevin and I do a pretty good job at answering them when the other person is talking as well. We're going to have some polls. I have a few polls lined up as well. So feel free to interact with those polls. And I think we have the cameras and mics off, except for Kevin, Amy, and myself. So with that, let's dive into a little bit of securing and governing your data estate with Microsoft Purview. You ready, Kevin?
Let's do it. Let's roll.
All right. So today, with how cybersecurity is constantly shifting, with especially what's going on in the digital world continues to grow, there's been a lot of different research that's gone out there, and the consensus amongst a bunch of the research that I actually looked into, and so did Microsoft, was 83% of organizations at some point have at least one data breach. That's a pretty high number. 20% of those data breaches are actually from internal actors as well. So, I mean, if you just think about, that's people inside your organization, whether malicious or not, it's because of internal stuff that happened. And the average cost on the studies that we actually looked at as well, the average cost of this was $15.4 million. That's a lot of money, Kevin.
Yeah, it is a lot of money. It's a lot of money.
When I saw that number, I was like, whoa, okay, that could hurt a lot of people. So that's why I wanted to make sure that that cost is out there. If you haven't been hit today, congratulations, but you're not out of the woods. You need to make sure that you're doing everything you can to make sure that you're safe, because no matter the size of the company, $15.4 million is a lot of money. So the potential cost of that number, I personally don't think it can be ignored. I mean, data leaks and theft, it's a really high thing that's out there today. So that's why another reason we wanted to do this, because these are real numbers, right, Kevin?
Right. And the other thing too is, when I think about these numbers, I mean, whether it's 15 million or whether it's 2 million or 30 million, it's all into the millions. It's a massive amount, no matter how you slice it. And the damage once done cannot be undone. Yep. But there's things that, I look at this in two ways. There's things that we can do to prevent data loss with policies and other types of detection, products that are out there that other Microsoft or other parties have, right? But there's also, what happens if something's missed? If something slips out anyway, then what do you do? So it's preparing and preventing it from happening. But then how do you pull it back in and control the data after it slips out, either accidentally or through bad actors or whoever it may be, right? How can you pull that data back and make sure you still have control about it? So we'll get into that here too, which is really, really interesting how Microsoft has approached this.
Yeah, and what we were talking about earlier before we jumped on, our friend Travis, he said something in a meeting one time, and it still just resonates with me today. Like, you can do anything and everything you can to protect yourself, but you need to protect yourself because it only takes that one time, right? They only need to be right once. So that's another reason why we wanted to have this topic today, because again, these numbers are real, and it just takes one for you to be in that 83%. It just takes one for you to be in that 15.4 million average, right? So that's why we're talking about this today.
Right.
So data security, they can happen in a multitude of ways, but if you look at it, that you can kind of categorize them in 3 different types of scenarios. One is if their organization doesn't have visibility into its data, or the data is at risk or misuse, right? So that's the number one. That's where we see most people falling into. Surprising to me was number 2 was was that insider risk, that malicious intent of people trying to exfiltrate the data. Like I didn't think that was going to be the number 2 one, but all the research that I did, it was number 2. And the third one is just the inadvertent mistakes that Kevin was mentioning as well. It was an accident share. Somebody was on a meeting and they didn't mean to do it, but it became visible to the public. So those are the 3 categories that things came in order at that. So that first one, you just need to make sure about your data and how you're protecting it, but don't overlook insiders. And I know that's hard to say, Kevin, because you hire these people to do a thing for your company, but I was shocked. I don't know if you were, about number 2 being insider risk.
Yeah, there's that, and also if we dive deeper into insider risk, and you've got another name up there, Dropbox. Dropbox, or I'll mention the G word, the Google word, the Google Cloud. I can say that as from someone from Microsoft, but maybe not too many times.
Yeah, it's a bad word.
But maybe you do use, a Google Cloud service, or I'll say AWS as well service, or a Dropbox service. Maybe that's part of your company policy, and you want to stick with that instead of using, a OneDrive or a SharePoint or something like that from Microsoft. Hey, that's okay. But how can you secure that data that's out there as well using the approach that Chris and I are going to talk about here? Very interesting approach here, and very, I wouldn't say simple, but not nearly as complex as you may think to implement something like this, to control that data that's hosted in third-party clouds.
Yeah, good calling on that. And you're right, you're giving a little bit away. So it's a little foreshadowing into the rest of the presentation. Yep. I like
it. Keep everyone interested. Yes.
That's right. The cool thing about the way how Microsoft Purview and how they look at data security. So if you think about those 3 main buckets, Microsoft has a way to actually help with all 3 of those products, right? And so that first one about your data at risk, or it's not classified correctly, right? That's information protection. The insider risk, or people malicious intent from people inside your organization, insider risk management. And then the inadvertent thing, which, I thought that was going to be the number 1, but it wasn't, which is this data loss protection. Somebody did it on accident. It was not malicious. They didn't mean to do it. It just accidentally happened. And, Kevin, we're also hearing about this a lot with Copilot too, because people are creating documents that they didn't know that they had access to. And if they don't have proper levels of data actually defined in their organization, it could create a sensitive data, and then it could get pushed out as well. So DLP, data loss prevention rather, it might be starting to move up the list because of all the advancements with AI.
You're right, and that's something we went over last time. I'm sure that recording is out there somewhere when we talk about things like AI and Microsoft Copilot. And before you implement that, sure, you can just go ahead and click the button and implement it. But beforehand, you do want to make sure that you understand the security compartments and how security and data is protected throughout your entire organization. Or, if you don't, and it's not set up correctly, then someone could ask Copilot a question and it could pull back information that you may not want it to pull back from something that's open out there. All of this kind of feeds in together that we're talking about here. Yep.
Yeah, and I purposely put DLP there for last, and I wanted to use that example because I'm still getting a lot of questions and buzz around Copilot, as we should, because it's a very slick technology that Microsoft has out there, but it's also very dangerous if not done correctly, to your point. So data loss prevention is part of the Purview program that comes in everything that we have out there. And the cool thing is, Kevin, the middle circle that's on this diagram, this is something that Microsoft released fairly new, and it's this adaptive protection, right? And adaptive protection, when I started doing more research into it, I was just blown away at what you guys have done using some of your machine language that you have inside there today.
Yep, a lot going on there, and it's just the beginning. There's so much to this. Oh, I see a poll. First one of the day.
Yeah, supposed to drop that one out there a minute ago. I got busy talking like normal. So let's start talking about, let's do a little kind of shallow dive on just information protection, right? So it's protecting the sensitive data. So if you start using It used to be called AIP, and then it got rebranded, and Microsoft Purview Information Protection is the name that it is now. And what it does is it provides the automation and the machine learning to help discover and classify the data at scale in your tenant, right? And so that's what you want to do. And you can do it all across your data inside of a single pane of glass inside that 365 portal.
Yep, you got it. And I love to look at the second bullet here. Safeguard data throughout its life cycle with labeling and encryption built into productivity tools. So it's built in as opposed to what I like to call bolted on. So we'll talk about this later, but there's no agents on this. This is a product that's built in to Microsoft 365, right? There's no installation. It's more or less the licensing and the configuration of it. That's what you've got to do. It really minimizes when we think about complexity throughout the environment. You're still in the same Microsoft 365 admin portal with integration throughout. You don't have to learn a whole other portal for this, right? You don't have to install agents all over the place, whether it be on end user desktops and laptops or on servers or in the cloud services, whatever it may be. It's all already built in as opposed to, again, bolted on. But the safeguarding data throughout its life cycle, I think of, if I email you, Chris, a document from my Microsoft email account, and it goes to you at A&M, you know, once it's gone, it's gone. Once I've emailed that file, it's out of my control. I can never pull that back without some forethinking, you know, some thinking into Microsoft Purview, information protection, and how I can control that data once it's slipped out of my control. We'll talk about a few scenarios here as we go forward.
Yeah, and I remember talking about that same scenario. If you had information protection configured properly and correctly, I remember when you and myself and Tony were working together, and he shared a document, and he had it classified correctly. And the way how he shared it is, to your point, it did leave the organization and it came to me, but I was not allowed. I tried to share it. I tried to share it with my boss because he wanted to see some information that was in that document. He's like, I can't get on this because it was set up where I was the only one after it left the organization that could review that document. So that's some of the power of the tool that comes into Purview, to your point, without an agent like that. I'm glad you called that out. I know we're going to get to that in a little bit too, but without an agent, you're not having to install anything.
Right. It's not meant to get in the way of us as well, us as users, right? I have it. Microsoft internally has had it for years. And has it ever gotten in my way from me doing my work? Okay, maybe once or twice where I'm like, how come I can't share this file? Oh, it's because of this that's in the file that's classified as something only company internal, something I may have completely missed. If it's a 10-page document, if it's one sentence, I could have missed that. But a service like this picks it up and automatically applies a classification label to it. And in some cases, if it's too sensitive, because you can have multiple levels of sensitivity, if it's too sensitive, it won't go out, or it will, but no one can see it except for you or someone else with a Microsoft, in this case, a Microsoft company identification.
Yep. Nope, good call out. And so, I mean, I know I kind of probably jumped the gun on this side. I forgot I had this slide in here because just how we walk through. But here's a little scenario that I wanted to kind of walk through. So you have the need to secure the collaboration tools and the data security incidents, and think of the number of meetings that we were just talking about that people have every day, specifically the meetings that involve internal and external, like we were talking about with me, you, and Tony, right? Let's think about that sensitive document that he shared over the meeting, or he emailed it, but you can do it over meeting chats as well, and it contained that confidential information related to maybe it's your organization's earnings or certain company data, some IP, some PII, you name it, right? But if, and I know Tony's not on here, and he's probably going to like, hey, you mentioned me today. So if he wouldn't have had that configured, this is the route that it would have went through, right? So it was not labeled correctly and it got exposed and external users saw it, and now it's leaked. To Kevin's point earlier, it left the organization. There's nothing he can do other than asking people and hoping that they do it, right? he can't get that back. But if you have information protection configured, the document's labeled, inaccessible to external users, it's labeled highly confidential, and now your data is protected. And now that 83% number you're still not part of that, right?
Right, exactly. Yep, and that's how you have to think about this, is that it's not if, it's when.
Yep.
Data will leak. Bad actors or accidents, like Chris was saying, that's number two. It will happen, but how do you control that, and how do you prepare for it, right? And how do you prepare for after the fact that it does go out? We'll talk more about that in a moment here too.
Yeah, so speaking of insider risk, so this is when this came up, and I started putting together the slides for this as well. I did actually put some of the information into copilot.microsoft.com, and I did get some stuff from there. So I'm not going to lie, I did use Copilot to help me a little bit with this. The biggest thing that came out of there was data doesn't move itself, right? People move data. And when that kind of phrase popped up when I was creating this, I was like, boy, that's powerful, right? It's not just going to walk on its own. It's going to need somebody to help it find the door and walk out its organization. And that's when you need to understand your users and the context around the intent of the data that's inside your organization and how to really protect it with the right policies. And I know that you've hired these people and that you trust these people to do their job, but things happen. Whether it's on purpose or whether it's a mistake, things happen because it does, like I said, take people to move this. So the insider risk management is that privacy first solution that helps manage the insider risk while protecting the user's trust on the data by default, and the strong privacy controls, including RBAC, role-based access controls, explicit user audit opt-in, or audit log. So I mean, that's a lot of stuff to unpack there. You can control this with RBAC. That's pretty slick.
Right. The other thing too, Chris, is right in the middle. I keep going right in the middle, right, on these different bullet points to call out. Identify hidden risks with 100+ built-in machine learning models. Really cool stuff. It's not actually 100+. I think that's an old number. Last count, it was 308. Really grown over the years, right? And Chris and I presented on this over the years several times as well, this very topic. But 308, right, and growing. What are those built-in machine learning models? Well, when we think about it, maybe Chris and I are in a call center, and we're maybe I'm in a call center and he's part of billing, right? And I get a call that I've sold something, but I have a billing department that runs credit card numbers. So I am always giving Chris over Teams, for example, credit card numbers, customer contact information, addresses, the 3-digit code on a Visa card or something like that to let the card go through. Maybe internally that's acceptable, but what about if we're in a three-way conversation, right? Or 4 or 5 people in a conversation on Teams, right? We've got some external people as well. I can't let them see that information. So one of the models, one of the 308 and counting models that's in here, will identify credit card numbers, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover cards. They're all different numbers, right? But it identifies those and will automatically put a classifier on those. Other examples, Social Security numbers for the US. Our numbers are different from maybe those in France or you name the country. Passport numbers. US passport numbers are different between us and you name the other country, right? All of those different models, all those different numbers are built in. You select them from a list and say, yep, if anyone throws any numbers or anything like that into a Teams conversation, into a Word document that gets stored up in SharePoint, in OneDrive, sent over email, sent over Teams, go ahead and classify them, right? Put an automatic classifier on there. Or we're thinking about automatically applying labels, but maybe just suggest things. Like there's policy tips out there, stuff that comes up in a Word document where, if I put a credit card number in there, a policy comes up on the top of the screen and it notifies the user, hey, I think you might have just put confidential information into this. We suggest that you apply this policy to it. And you say, yes, sounds good. I didn't even think about that. Didn't even know we had that capability. And you leave it up to the user. Or the flip side, you apply it automatically, but then you give the user, again, a policy tip. Hey, here's why we applied it. Do you want to override this? And you leave it up to the user. And if they want to override it, you force them to write in a justification, which is then logged on the back end. Very cool stuff, very well thought out for so many different scenarios out there that so many different companies have. Remember Microsoft 365, that the whole tenant idea, that it's Yeah, how many millions of customers and then hundreds of millions of accounts operate in this cloud environment every single day across, you name the industry, you name the country, it's everywhere, and it's pretty amazing on what it is and the types of services like this that are built in that cover a lot of the security concerns that we have. And this is just, again, one area of it. So again, 300 plus different machine learning models in here. But one other thing I'll mention, what if you have different project codes, different project names, things that are custom to you in your company and your environment? How do you monitor for those? Well, you build up a custom model, right? So custom match, I think it uses regex is the language behind that.
Yep.
Pretty simple to do, right? But that will then look for the ingredients to grandma's super secret cookie recipe, if that's what you want to protect, right? You name it, it'll protect it in there. Again, pretty wild stuff. So Chris, I'll stop there.
Yep.
Any other comments on this one?
Well, to kind of take a couple of the things that you put together and put it in more of a use case that I've actually seen happen with some companies that I've worked with is they'll take a file and they will copy it to a USB drive. And this was like a classified document to use. We'll say it had PII and it had a social security number in it. And so, but the rules that we had set in place was our governance strategy. If it contained PII, we had to append that to the naming structure, right? So it's an easier thing so people can see it. It's more evident for them, hey, this document controls has PII. So there's governance that we try to put in place to help our users. They copied it down to a USB. They then changed the name of that file on that USB to try to get around the governance that we put in place. Then they uploaded it back. To your point, what you were saying, because it still had the protection policies in place to track those social security numbers, while you evaded our kind of governance policy that we created, we're still able to protect it with the policy that you're having in place. So you can take that step further, and as well with insider risk, you can also configure it with adaptive protection that we're going to get into a little bit later, that now that user, instead of being a low risk user, has elevated themselves because they're trying to evade to a medium or a high risk user. And we'll get into more of that in a little bit later, but that's what we're talking about, how data doesn't move itself, right? I mean, I know that was a long drawn out example, but I've seen it happen.
Yep. And the important thing to remember here is that encryption / the protection that's on a file, whether it's emailed or across a USB drive that's shared or whatever it may be, that file, the encryption follows the file. That's the thing to keep in mind. So every time that it's emailed and the protection is put on there that says, hey, only someone from A&M.com with an account in your organization can open this file. If someone else tries to open that file, it's going to prompt them for a username and password. It then goes back to the cloud, tries to authenticate. If successful, the file opens. If not, access denied. It's just one more use case, or something else to think about when we talk about encryption following the file. Let's say, Chris, I email you a Word document. Well, okay, or you email it to me and I can't open it up because this encryption is on there. I say, I'm going to get around this thing because it's only on Microsoft Word documents. I'm going to take the extension of that file and change it from a .doc, and I'm going to change it to a .txt, so it opens up a notepad. You could do that with a lot of Word files, natively. You may lose some customization, some formatting, and so forth, but you could still open the file and read the words, right? Well, here, if you did that with a file that's been encrypted, that's protected by one of these files, it just shows up as a whole bunch of random character strings and something that you'll never make sense of, right? It's encrypted. So case in point, it's a neat example to put up there as well.
Yeah, and I don't know if you purposely did that or not, but that's kind of exactly what this one is for.
Always leading in, right?
Yeah. We may or may not have shared these slides with each other beforehand, right?
Right.
So to kind of expand on that, somebody submitted their resignation, and they want to start grabbing some files before they leave the organization. But maybe you don't have any kind of protection policy in place, and they are able to get those files onto a USB, or they dumped them up to their personal OneDrive or their personal Google Drive or their whatever, something that they have access to that does not use their company email address, right? So if you don't have any of that in place, then no protection. Now data loss, data theft, right? So that is gone. Could be highly sensitive data for the company for a project that you're working on. It could be a lot of different things. But to the example that Kevin was talking about, if you had it protected where you had to have, say, an @Microsoft.com or an @ANM.com credentials to actually use that file. So same example, right? They resigned, they copied it down to USB, they put it up to their personal OneDrive, whatever they did. Now they're on their personal laptop trying to access that file, but they're not logged in with their @Microsoft.com or @ANM.com. You just evaded that and you protected your data. So simple controls can help the data not leave the organization.
Right.
So sorry, I probably beat that one way too hard, but
nope, it's great. Bringing up an example and then walk through it on the screen here. I love it, Chris. Yep.
Yeah. So, and all this is coming around. We talk about all these policies kind of interweave into each other, but they help define those three main buckets that we talked about earlier. And so we're talking about preventing the data loss with data loss prevention. And again, this is all native inside the portal. This is all part of Purview, which is all part of your tenant that you get. There's no agents that we've installed. So, and the cool thing about this is that it ensures that not only the data, but the applications that are using the data inside it in Copilot, right? I mean, that's a big thing that people are talking about. So DLP rules can make sure that Copilot doesn't have access to things it's not supposed to as well, because Copilot respects the rights and the access of the user. So if DLP is configured that Kevin's not supposed to have access to highly confidential data because his role at the organization doesn't grant him that, but he has access to the folder that stuff is in there. We're talking about two different things, right? I'm talking about a highly confidential file that is in a folder that Kevin has access to, but he is not allowed to see highly confidential information. So somebody classified it correctly, but put it in the wrong folder. Data loss prevention can help with that.
Right. Something else, Chris, that's on here is, and we've been talking about specifically, for the most part, Microsoft applications, right? Mm-hmm. And the protection that Microsoft Purview has on the different Microsoft apps out there. It's not just Microsoft applications, things like Adobe Acrobat files, mm-hmm. right? You can encrypt those files as well using Microsoft Purview. So don't think that it's just the Microsoft ecosystem that Purview is helping to protect your data in.
Yeah, and because of DLP, and if you marry that with Defender for Cloud Apps, what you were talking about earlier, you can also follow that into Dropbox, into Box, into the G Word, into other things as well.
That's right. That's right.
and you can even do it in other browsers. So I mean, that's the cool thing with how Purview and DLP interacts with the data. You don't have to just protect it against Edge, right? How many browsers are out there today? There's Chrome, there's Firefox, so you can protect it from Edge, inside those applications. Edge. Yeah, I mentioned Edge first.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So it's cloud native. That's everything we were talking about right there. Is just to make sure that this is cloud native. It's not an agent that we're installing anywhere that you have to make sure that you're pushing out updates to. This is cloud native. This is happening inside the tenant, and it's unified, right? It allows you to create and deploy and manage your policies across all the workloads that you use from the compliance portal. That's the cool part, right, Kevin? You don't have to go into all these different applications to do this. It's inside the compliance portal, inside Purview.
Right. And I'll say this too. I mean, and we're talking about the cloud here, right? We're talking about data that's out there in tenants. There are agents that, let's say you, for some reason, you still have some data repository, an old file share server, they still exist in your environment, right? In an office somewhere that people access. And you want to understand, hey, what type of data is out there? What's in those files? there's agents that you can actually run in a discovery mode that'll come back and give you reports based on the policies that you want to put into place. You know, if there's 10,000 files in the server, hey, these 100 files, example, all, of these 100 files, here's the policy that each one hit. Credit card numbers here, passport numbers here, grandma's super secret cookie recipe down here in that file, and so on and so forth. But you can see before you put things into place, which helps you further refine and design the application of these policies and start to understand, hey, what kind of an impact in the environment will this have before I go forward with it?
Yep.
So a little bit of extra work for on-premises type equipment, but the capabilities still exist.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So walking through some examples on that. So we'll pick on the person submitting their resignation again, and they're trying to get data. And with no policies, the data is going to leave the organization. I'm going to use the cookie recipe. Grandma's cookie recipe is just out there now, and anybody can make it. And it's no longer they have to come to Kevin's house to get the fantastic cookies, right? Like anybody can make them, so he loses out. But if you have DLP and you limit that's a highly confidential data. Nobody's supposed to have grandma's recipe. Now, if that policy's in there, it kind of goes along with how managed insider risk was, where that user's not granted to that kind of data. So without that kind of tag that's put out there, then it can't follow that user. So, or maybe the person does have access to it. So now let's combine insider risk and DLP together. So insider risk, right? Kevin's got access to it. He's supposed to have access to it. He's using his A&M account or his Microsoft account, and he's doing it all day long, and it's a highly confidential data. Now he leaves the company and he's got it on his USB drive. Now we've got two scenarios that we're now protecting the data, right? He's not logging in with a Microsoft.com account, so he can't access it that way. And his Kevin at Outlook, his personal email, that's not his email, by the way, is not registered to have highly confidential information. Now we've got double protection to make sure that that data is actually safe.
Yep, I was just answering a question in the chat window here, Chris. Yep, good question.
No worries at all. I mean, you can take advantage of malicious actors as well. And when you start talking about you have some type of attack, somebody gets into your organization, and once again, you have nothing configured, your data's at risk. But a malicious actor comes in, they get access to the data, and now they copy that data out and they try to publish it, right? They have some way, they've gotten this data and it's published now. But the people on the internet don't have the proper visibility because they don't have the proper access to actually see this type of data. So with some type of protection in place, even when people that can infiltrate into the system and get access to the data, when they try to access it with a non-domain.com, at Microsoft, at A&M.com to kind of publish that data, they're going to have a lot of difficulties doing that. So you can start protecting your data with these correct policies as well. So I mentioned a couple of times about adaptive protection with Purview. And this, like I said before, this is kind of a newer thing that came out that Microsoft has out there. I'm trying to drop the poll. I'm not doing good at multitasking. Here we go. Poll got dropped. So in the past, admins might have received many alerts when they were trying to contain sensitive information that were shared, transferred, copied, printed, whatever it was. It was overwhelming, and it was resource draining to try to triage and address all the alerts, especially with limited support, right? Because security always gets not always, most of the time that's where people aren't put, right? People want people to invest in the company, not in security. So security is always a lot of different people. With adaptive protection, admins can continuously detect the critical risks that kind of come in through the organization with machine learning driven analysis on the content and the user. So if you go back to what we were talking about before, where somebody, they changed the name of the document, right? And so now they were low risk because they were a model employee. They just did what they were supposed to do, but they they got a fantastic offer. They're now going to leave, but they're going to work out their notice. So they're going to start trying to download stuff or rename stuff or reclassify stuff so they can get as much access to it. Every time they do something, it's adding to their risk score. So if you think about, Kevin and I have talked about secure score plenty of times before. With adaptive protection, there's a risk score that's actually assigned to the user based on the activities of how they manipulate and move data inside the organization. And that's what adaptive protection is. So I did put a little screenshot of the portal, and this is what it's going to look like. So you can see that the user was fairly low. Then they started renaming files, and they started downloading files, and they started deleting files, and they started printing files, and you can see that their risk score just skyrocketed. Then they didn't do anything for a little while, and then they did one event. So you can see one event right here. Like they went immediately back up. And then nothing happened for a while, but because they've had two events or two things where they bounced up really high, then they had a third event, and they went right back up again. And you can see that they're constantly elevating their risk. And look, then they resigned. Because admins can now see this, they can see all these risk levels. They can create adaptive protection policies that if somebody goes from a low to a medium risk, they're no longer allowed to, say, print files. They're no longer allowed to rename files. They're no longer allowed to download files. Any kind of policy that you can kind of think up inside your head, once they hit this risk score that you deem inside the portal, and Microsoft does a fantastic job of creating a bunch of these for you, so you don't have to actually think about, well, shit, what do I want my risk level to be for medium? No, Microsoft does a fantastic job through all the learning that they've done throughout the years on doing this. So you just take advantage of it. It's here. This is here to help protect your data, which is important to your company, right? So make sure that if you're using Purview, that you really start looking in, because this is just slick. And Kevin, I didn't mean to dominate that slide.
No, it's great. I was answering a couple more questions in the chat window. Please keep the questions coming, and I'll try to pull up some information very quickly to forward on to everyone here that's listening in as well. But Chris, I know we're on the topic here of someone that's someone that's resigning from the company. They put their 2 weeks notice in, and so on and so forth. But what about some other like bad actor type scenarios, not just the insider risk, but what if someone has taken over your identity? You did not have multi-factor authentication turned on, which the majority of people still do not. We could talk about that later at length. But what if that happens? Happens every day. And all of a sudden, your email is being downloaded to an IP address in a country where you never have operated in before. A policy like this could kick into place to stop that from happening. Or you're all of a sudden, you're in your daily routine, your daily activity. You might be opening up 10 to 15 different PowerPoints or 10 to 15 different Word documents or something, just part of your normal day. Hey, that's your pattern. That's your activity. The system knows that, right? That's a standard behavior for you. But what if you start downloading, I don't know, 1,000 documents, 100 documents, maybe on top of that to an IP address, again, that's outside of your normal operating country? Well, in that case, it sounds like there could be a bad actor out there. Let's go ahead and put a policy into place that's going to prevent that from happening, right? So now we're talking about Purview and a lot of other different systems that come into play to help, again, protect your data automatically, because it could be happening at 2 a.m. in your local time zone where all your admins are. They're not awake and monitoring this, right? You need something in place to watch for this, right? So a lot of different capabilities in these systems. We're just really scratching the surface on this.
Yeah, so we talked about information protection, we talked about insider risk, we talked about DLP, and we talked about adaptive protection. And I did happen to find a mechanics video that kind of pulled it all together, and I wanted to play that for everybody because we can talk about this stuff, but when I found this video, I was like, man, that just brings it all together. So Kevin, I'm going to go ahead and play this video.
Yep.
You can use these best-in-class solutions on their own, but together as part of a unified platform, they provide the most comprehensive and adaptive protection for your data based on how users are interacting with it, and then dynamically adjust data loss prevention policies to address the most critical data risks. For example, when information protection classifies content, the label is used as a condition in the corresponding data loss prevention policy. So now in the event of a specific action, like attempting to save to a USB, the policy is triggered and blocks the data exfiltration in its tracks. Notably, the policy action is automatically assessed in the context of the user, who, having resigned their position, has signaled several anomalous activities, from changing classification labels to downloading documents en masse, all activities sequenced by the machine learning and insider risk management, which has raised the user's risk level to elevated, resulting in them being blocked from the action. By contrast, a low-risk user attempting to perform the same action is warned instead of being blocked outright. This is because of the built-in adaptive protection powered by machine learning that literally adapts data loss prevention protections in real time based on the differing risk levels of individual users.
So a few people put in the chat that they couldn't hear it. Kevin, I think you have this link that you're going to drop out there.
Yep, you got it. I'll put it out there.
So Kevin's going to drop it, and this is just a snippet of a longer video about Purview in general. It's a fantastic video to watch. I just put a little snippet on how it kind of pulls it all together. And somebody asked a question, how does it do it between different users? And you can see on this last screen that Adele is, high risk and Alex is not. And you can see doing the same exact thing. Adele was blocked and Alex was just warned, doing the same exact action. So that's how the adaptive protection can do it based on the risk level of the actual individuals. And for those that didn't get the audio, I do apologize, but I know some people did get it. Like I said, Kevin just dropped it in the chat, so snag that video, the link, and check it out in just a little bit. So Kevin, when we were putting this together, I wanted to get a good use case from the case files that Microsoft has published, and I found this one. It was probably the second one, but it was a really good story. So their problem was they had over 300,000 professionals that worked around the world, right? They were everywhere, and they worked with clients, externals, internal people, guests, consultants, right? It was truly a collaborative type company. It was not just an internal only type company, but they wanted to make sure when they shared content that it was only shared with the people that were supposed to get it. They didn't want to be victim to oversharing. And so how did they do that? Is they worked with Microsoft to make it easier for external users to join the collaboration groups without losing sight of their data security, because of the policies that we've been talking about labeling the classifications, about managing the user risk level. So they created a strategy that worked for them as their organization, so they could put the labels on the containers and the files, so the applications like OneDrive and Teams and SharePoint and Exchange, that the privileges were on the files. And so when they did share it, they didn't have to worry about oversharing or accidentally sharing.
Yeah, great use case. Of course, EY is just a massive company out there, a lot of different areas that they operate in throughout the world. And it just shows you the breadth and the scale of what this type of service can operate at, in as well as if you're a 10-person company, right? The same controls, the same capabilities still apply. It's tenant-based.
Yeah, and Kevin, I did pick this because it is a large company, right? So this can happen at scale. When we talk about things, there's people that are small companies are like, well, that's just too much for me. And then there's large companies, well, that can't handle us. Yes, it can. It can do across the board. It's part of the license set. It's the same configuration for a small company or a large company, and it can protect them just the same. So if you want to read about the full case study, I just put up a little slide about it. I did drop the full case study that came out from the Microsoft site into the chat, so make sure that you grab that if you're interested in reading more about it. It was a really good read on when I was going through it. That's why I wanted to share it. So make sure that you guys actually take a look at that. So we talked a lot about our opinions, maybe some facts that we've gotten, but I always like to lead people, this is not just Kevin and I talking. This is an independent study, Forrester, that named Microsoft and a lot of the waves that they do around data security. So in Microsoft, they're a leader in a lot of things that they do. And 6 of the Forrester waves around data security, Microsoft is a leader. And that's just one of the stories that are out there. Gartner has the same ones. I didn't have time to pull the Gartner data. I did have the Forrester data handy, but this is not just us saying it, right? This is a third-party audit independent consultant group putting the study out there.
Yep, and I think it's important to note too that there's a lot of companies out there. As if you just pick apart one of these diagrams here, just going to one of the topics in the middle, there must be in each one probably 10 to 15 different company names that are mentioned. Microsoft is in the upper right quadrant for all of these categories, along with a few others. But again, the advantage here is that those others, you probably have to install an agent, another admin dashboard somewhere, right, to be able to utilize their services, which I'm sure are very good. Whereas opposed to the Microsoft service, it's built in, again, not bolted on. It's a licensing, it's configuration, and you're ready to go with this. There's a little bit more to it than that, but it provides a lot less complexity in your environments with a service like this. Yep.
So if you've listened to things that I've done before with Kevin, we're always talking about reducing costs while reducing risk. And this is a fantastic example of that. There's lots, to Kevin's his point that he just made, there's lots of companies that can do this. And we're not saying that they're not good at what they do. What we're saying is you can hit all 3 of the major concerns with this one tool, right? And so if you start looking at the ROI on that, the studies that we've done and Microsoft has done and that Gartner has done and that Forrester has done, all the ones that we've actually had access to, the average ROI over 3 years on implementing this is 46%. That's a big ROI if you think about data security on actually getting the money that you're putting forward to back. And if you think about the cost savings, so if you're doing some of the other companies that are out there, they all do fantastic things and they all have a price tag. If you're on an E3 today, the uplift to an E5 to get some of the automated features isn't that much of a uplift, right? There, I think it's 12 retail. It's like $12 of an uplift. I think, don't quote me on that, but I think it's about $12. That's a lot cheaper than a lot of other programs that are out there today. So not only can you save on that, but you can get that ROI out of it. And that's pretty big if you look at how organizations are set up today.
Yep. I also put into the chat window that Microsoft Purview, while Chris, you pointed out it was recently renamed, maybe about a year or so ago. These capabilities, you also mentioned one of the former names, it was Azure Information Protection, or AIP as we used to call it. It's not something new. It's actually been around for a good 5 to 6 years, as far back as I can remember anyway. So the capabilities are not new. They just have evolved and changed names a few times over the years. We like to do that at Microsoft.
Yeah. You'll get used to it, then they'll change again. Sorry, it's a joke I always do. But
Chris gives me a hard time all the time about that, so I'm used to it.
If you start just doing one of these, I would recommend doing all 3. Obviously, AIP or information protection, insider risk, and DLP, along with adaptive protection. But if you just do one of these, you can reduce your risk up to 40% by just doing one of these. You don't have to be an expert to do some of this stuff too. Microsoft has done a really good job of putting out some policies, like some default compliance policies that are in there. But to Kevin's point a handful of slides ago, you can create your own. Like I think what was on that one slide, Project Falcon, I think it was. Project Falcon was an internal code name for something, and that they wanted to make sure that didn't get out to the organization. So you can create, to your point, you said it goes on regex, right? So you can create your own custom policies on that as well. So we talk about through all this stuff. Microsoft has done a good job, in my opinion, about making sure there are some good controls out the bat, but you can also do it in a way where it's detrimental to your company, where you start to impact the users. And I say that is because we're here to help. right? So if you want to make sure that you have the licensing today, or I think we're on an E5, can we do this today? Or I'm on an E3, how do I uplift? I can help you make sure that you are getting the correct licensing and using the correct licensing that you have today. Another way that we can help you out is, well, you guys barely just cut the surface open on this, and now I've got all these questions on all it can do. Microsoft has what I refer to as art of possible workshops, and they have a few of them that I have access to. Then we can walk through these, and I'll pull Kevin in as well. We can do this art of possible workshop where we can really deep dive and demo out information protection, DLP, insider risk. We can start demoing these out. We can show you truly how these can help. Or if you already have some stuff set up in your organization and you just want maybe somebody to put an extra set of eyes on there to make sure you're set up for preferred practices, or you guys sold me today and you just want to get it set up, well, we can help you there too. Make sure you email my team that I put down there on the bottom on there, Microsoft@anm.com. That comes to me and the team. Somebody will reach back out as quick as we can, and we will help you with whatever you need to do on that. So
yeah, Chris, and just one other thing I'll say about this service is, while powerful, if configured correctly, like Chris had hinted at, if you are not sure about what it can do and how to implement it, hey, let's talk. Right? We don't want you putting this in place and not fully understanding the consequences that a misconfigured policy may have. It's similar to, I mentioned multi-factor authentication earlier as kind of like a joke, and in terms of roughly half the tenants out there in the Microsoft cloud environment do not have multi-factor authentication enabled. Well, you can go by and you can click a button if you know where that is in the admin portal, but you really need to be prepared on how it's configured, because if implemented improperly, you hit the button and you can lock out your whole company from everything in the cloud. So you really have to understand what's going on as a result of any action or configuration that you do. And that's where these workshops come into play. That's where Chris and his team of people come into play, where, hey, they do it every day, right? They're out there helping customers every day. They know what these actions will do and what they don't do, and can help guide you in the right direction. So Chris, I'll stop there. Yep.
No, I mean, to go on that, so we've talked a couple other webinars that we've done too about Secure Score. It's a very similar thing too. You can go in there and you can see all these cool policies that are out there. It's like, oh, I want to implement that. And to your point, you click the button and you don't really understand the ramifications on that. And you take in our Secure Score example that I'm going with, you take you from a 70 to a 92%. Now you've locked out most of everybody in the company, and now you're doing a disservice to your company because you've made it, and this is kind of an oxymoron, too secure, right? It's too secure for you to do business. And that's where I think Kevin was getting at, is we need to make sure that you do this smartly, you roll this out in a smart way, you educate the users in a smart way, and you notify them that, hey, we are making these changes. We don't intend to impact, but there could be impact. So communication is going to be key.
Right.
So with that, Kevin, as always, I have fun doing these with you. I already got the next one scheduled up, April 16th. Kevin and I are going to be back. We're going to try to have a guest with us as well. We're going to try to get another person on there. We're going to talk about Microsoft security, and is there a defender for that? Because there's a lot of them. So that's kind of the topic we're going to discuss. We're going to dissect the main portions of Defender because there's a lot of them. Kevin and I are going to have some fun with that.
That's right.
If you want to go ahead and register for that too, since I put that date out there, let's go ahead and drop the registration link in the chat as well. So I dropped that in the chat. Kevin, closing thoughts?
Microsoft Purview. Just so many capabilities. Again, we just scratched the surface of it here, and that's where the workshops really come in to help demonstrate. What are they, about a half a day, Chris? A couple hours long to, in a virtual room or in a physical room that you and your team will help moderate and really walk you through on the capabilities that this thing really has. It's so much more deep of a conversation than just an hour here on a webinar going through this.
Yep. Typically, you're right. It's about 4 hours. We can break it into two-hour sessions over 2 days if that works better for your schedule as well. We can make it convenient for you because I know 4 hours is still a lot of time to be away, but we can definitely help you out with that as well. So Kevin, as always, man, I greatly appreciate you jumping on and doing these with me. These are a blast. I had a lot of fun. Guys, if you need anything, Microsoft@anm.com, no matter what the topic is, we can definitely help you out with that as well. So Kevin, thanks as always. And I guess I'll see you on April 16th, right?
Sounds fantastic. Thank you, Chris. Always appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everyone.